Alright guys, so in this video we're going to hopefully review distance, midpoint, area, and perimeter. I hope it's nothing new, and then we are going to learn something new called perpendicular bisectors. So first off, the distance formula. Maybe you remember it, maybe you don't, but it's the big square root with parentheses x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, okay? Again, big lengthy formula. The midpoint formula is going to be add your x's, so x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. Okay, so again, midpoint is going to give you a point, and then distance formula is going to give you a number because it's going to be the length of something. A shortcut to doing distance formula, which we're going to talk about, is the Pythagorean Theorem. So hopefully you remember a squared plus b squared equals c squared, because that's going to be a shortcut to finding the distance formula on a coordinate plane. Okay. All right, so let's look at some problems. This question, it wants us to find the distance between 2 points. Okay, and since it's not on a graph, we're going to have to do some kind of math. So first off, you're going to label your x1 and your y1, and your x2 and your y2. And so now we're just going to plug it into the distance formula. So let me go ahead and rewrite that. x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So now let's substitute all of those numbers into our square root. So start off with x2, which was 6, minus a negative 1. So again, that minus sign's always in your equation. Squared, don't forget that, plus your y2, which was 6, minus your y1, which was 5, squared. Okay, so now we know that if you've got two negative, it's a positive. So 6 plus 1 is going to be 7. So I'm going to have 7 squared plus 6 minus 5 is just 1 squared, all under the square root. 7 squared is going to be 49. And then 1 squared is going to be 1. So basically, the square root of 50 is going to be my answer. And so with our calculator, where did it go? All right, so in our calculator, where the square root button is right here above the x squared button in blue, so what you have to do is press second and then that x squared button. Hopefully yours does not have the parenthesis. Mine's a little bit funky, but if it does, you're going to have to close that parenthesis. And so the square root of 50 is 7.071. So let me just round that to 7.07. Okay, so if it says the nearest hundredths place, give me 2 decimal places. If it says nearest thousandths, you'll give me 3 decimal places. Okay. All right, now when we find the midpoint of these, let me go ahead and make this big screen. You're going to add your x's. So you would have negative 1 plus 6, and then divide that by 2. And then you're going to add your y's and divide by 2 as well. So you would have 5 plus 6 all over 2. So then you're going to simplify each part. So negative 1 plus 6 would be a 5 over 2. And then 5 plus 6 is 11 over 2. Now you could leave those as fractions, or if you wanted, you could make it 2.5 comma 5.5. Okay. So again, that's a little bit of review on distance and midpoint. Hopefully you remember it from 8th grade or algebra. So let's move on to some coordinate geometry. How do you find the length of AB? Well, first off, this problem is pretty easy because I can just count some boxes. Okay, so for AB, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4. So the length of AB is going to be 4 boxes. There's no need for me to do distance formula. Remember, perimeter is when you add up all the sides. So each of these sides is 4. So you could say 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 equals 16. And then for area of a square, we know is length times width. So again, if my length is 4 and my width is 4, I'd have 4 times 4, which would be 16. So our area and perimeter ended up being the same for this shape, okay? But again, remember, distance formula is not really needed when you can count the boxes on a grid. However, these problems obviously get harder. So if you look, now we're going to have to graph a square. So first off, I'm going to graph 0, 4, and I'm going to label that point A. And then I would graph B, which is at a 2, 1. C is at a negative 1, 1. And then D is at negative 3, positive 2. Okay, so now if I connect my shape, I notice that it's a square turned on its side. So now I can't nicely count these boxes to find the length of the side. So what you're going to have to do is one way is to use perimeter, or one way is to use the Pythagorean theorem. Now the good thing is if it's a square is you really only have to find one side, and then you know a square has all the same sides. So let me find this distance from A to B. Okay, so first up I'm going to start with my distance formula, which was x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So when you plug in points A and B, again, you could pick whatever points you want, but I would do 2 minus 0 squared plus 1 minus 4 squared. I'd end up getting 2 minus 0 is just 2 squared, plus 1 minus 4 is negative 3 squared. Lastly, 2 squared is 4, and then negative 3 squared is a 9. So 9 plus 4 is going to be 13. So the square root of 13 would be my answer. So again, I'm going to type that in the calculator and round to the nearest thousandths, so 2 decimal places. So second, x squared, square root of 13 is going to be 3.61. Okay, so basically this diagonal side right there is going to be 3.61. So that means every single side is going to be 3.61. Okay, so for perimeter, I would just have to add 3.61 4 times, or you can multiply it by 4. Okay, so the perimeter of that shape is going to be 14.44. Okay. All right. Now this last question wants us to find the midpoint of A and B. So I'm looking for a point in the middle. So again, to find midpoint, you're going to do x1 plus x2 over 2, and then y1 plus y2 over 2. So my x's would be 0, 0, and 2. So I'd have 0 plus 2 over 2. For your y's, you'd have 4 plus 1 over 2. And so then 0 plus 2 is going to be 2 over 2, comma, 5 over 2. Now again, we can simplify that further to 1, and then you can leave that as 5 over 2, or you can leave it as a decimal, which would be 2.5. Okay, so 1 and 2.5 would be somewhere in the middle, and that does make sense. My line's a little off, but that does look like the midpoint of line A and line B, okay? All right, so again, that is how you use the distance formula to find the sides. But actually, I'm going to teach you guys a shortcut. So I'm going to erase this so I've got some room to work with. If you didn't notice, the distance formula is obviously very long and can take you a lot of time. But if you use the Pythagorean theorem, which you know Pythagorean theorem is when you have a right triangle and you've got sides A and sides B, and then that diagonal side is your hypotenuse, or C. So if you notice, we can kind of make a triangle. We can make a right triangle where this little red piece is which I'm looking for is my hypotenuse. And we can easily count that that side is 2 boxes and that this side is 3 boxes. So what I have to do is my triangle is basically a height of 2 and a 3, and I'm looking for my hypotenuse. You would just have to do 2 squared plus 3 squared equals your c squared, which you're looking for. So you know 2 squared is going to be 4 plus 3 squared, which is 9, equals your c squared. And then you end up getting 13 equals c squared. Now to get rid of a square sign, you just have to square root both sides, okay? So you would get C equals the square root of 13, which is what we already found is 3.61, but that's a whole lot less work, okay? So again, if you're looking for a side, you can kind of draw out a little right triangle and find your two legs of it and do side squared plus side squared, and then just take the square root, and that's going to give you the answer. Okay, so again, feel free to use whatever way you want. If you love the distance formula, use it. If you think it's too much work, use the Pythagorean theorem, and if you need help me to explain that anymore, let me know. So let's look at the next problem. And first off, we got to graph it to see what shape it's going to be. So -3, +4. We can call that A if we want, even though they didn't give me letters. 1, 4, let's call it B. -3, -1, let's call it C. And then 4, -1, let's call it D. So once I connect my shape, I notice that it's not a square, it's actually a little trapezoid. Okay? So what we're going to need to do is kind of, first off, to find the perimeter, I need to know the lengths of each side. So let me actually do perimeter first. So easily I can count these boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this side length is a 5. From A to B is 1, 2, 3, 4. From C to D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I'm just missing this diagonal piece for my perimeter. Okay, now you can do distance formula between points B and points D, which would be these 2 points, or we can use the Pythagorean theorem, which I think is a whole lot quicker. So I'm going to do that. So what I'm going to do is, again, create a right triangle where my side I'm looking for is my hypotenuse. So then this length is going to be a 3. The height is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so again, I'm going to do 3 squared plus 5 squared equals my side that I don't know squared. So 3 squared is a 9. 5 squared is 25. And then 25 plus 9 is going to be 34. So again, if I square root both sides, this little diagonal is going to be the square root of a 34, which actually ends up being 5.83. Okay, so this little piece right here is going to be 5.83. So again, you can do distance formula or the Pythagorean theorem to find that last side. So now I can find my perimeter by adding up all the sides. So again, I don't need that triangle anymore. So you would add 5 for this side, plus 4 for the top side, plus 7, plus 5.83. Okay, because again, perimeter is when you add up the outside of the shape. So you get 21.83. Okay, so now actually finding the area is a little trickier. So let me go ahead and erase this. So I can actually kind of split this shape into 2. I see that here's a square, and then I have a triangle. So again, notice the area of a square is going to be length times width, and if you have forgotten, the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times the height. So I'm just going to find the area of 2 of the shapes and then add them together. So with this square, I know the height is a 5 and the length is 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the area of the square, it would be length times width, which would be 5 times 4. So 20 would be the area of my square. So now I'm going to find the area of the triangle. And so the base was 3, and the height of it was 5. So I'd say 1/2 my base, which was 3, times my height, which was 5. So half of 15 is going to be 7.5. So then I'm just going to add those 2 areas together to get a total of 27.5. So that was my area of the whole shape. Okay, so if it looks a little funky, again, split it into 2 shapes that you know how to find the area of. So the area of the square would be 20, area of this triangle would be 7.5, and add them together. Okay, so again, here's a little review on distance, midpoint, area, and perimeter. Go ahead and watch the second video on perpendicular of a bisector.